Hey guys, in this lecture we're going to talk about spot lamps. So I'm back in my default scene here with the fire hydrant. I'm going to go ahead and add a lamp again, and this time we're going to make it a spot lamp. Now spot lamps are useful for adding illumination to your scene with a kind of a hot spot. And you can control the fall off like we talked about before, but in terms of spotlight, it's a lot more controlled. And the biggest difference you're going to notice about spotlights is the way the shadows are going to work. So I'm just moving this up here, haven't changed anything. Let's go to the camera and let's render this and see what it looks like. So right away you can see exactly what I mean when I say spot. It's exactly like a spotlight you'd see in a play or in an old movie. It's got that nice ring around the outside edge, really fast fall off into nothing, and in this way you can really create some of that dramatic mood lighting that you might find in a film noir or stuff like that. So let's talk about some of the settings. As always, you've got your energy and your color. Let's change this to sort of let's go a little green this time, and go that direction. Just quickly see what that looks like. Okay, that's nice. And let's talk about this. Now your fall off is the same as it always was. Distance, which changes here, and then you've got your settings here for specular and diffuse. And the real big difference here is going to be your shadows. So you can turn shadows off, and if you render it, it's going to do nothing. By default, it's going to put you under buffer shadows, which does this. And then ray shadows is what we usually use, which is more accurate but slower. Alright, so let's talk about the shadows. So if we just switch through some of these options, we can see what they do. We've got classical, which adds some interesting bouncing effects we got there. We've got classic halfway, which is what we just used. We got a regular. Okay, not much change there. And then we got deep. Okay, so again, you may not notice any change right off. You're going to have to come in here and play with these settings. But basically come in here and you can change the type of shadow filter you're using. This is going to change how you're going to see the noise and the blurry edges of your shadows there. Again, you've got soft size, how many samples you would normally expect, and things like that, just like we've talked about before. One thing to note if you do use buffer shadows is that, again, you can bring this up. We'll add some tinting here, re-render this, and again, you got a little bit better control over tint of those shadows. Let's darken that up a little bit. Okay, so interesting stuff going on there. Let's try some other settings, see what that looks like. Okay, now these are interesting. They will control where your light starts and where it ends. So you can see I've got this angle here which controls how far out the cone goes on the spotlight, and then this line in the very middle, if I zoom out here, it starts right at the beginning of the light and goes all the way down to here, and that's what this clip start and clip end is. If I up this, the light's going to start lighting there, and it's going to stop lighting right at the plane, right there. And really the reason you would use this is if you had a light and you had it set to a specific setting with the camera and how far your scene goes. Depending on the size of your scene, if you've got your clip in set way out here, you're essentially rendering things or calculating light rays that you don't need to calculate because there's nothing out here you're going to render for. So if you pull this back to here, then you've got everything already taken care of. By the time you go past this plane, you're rendering stuff you don't need to render. So interesting to note what that's for. And then you can always control how wide the cone is using this here. So if you want a wider cone, change that, turn it up, and you can see it's further back now. If you want it narrow, you can change that to a really shallow cone. As you can see, I'm barely lighting anything outside the realm of this fire hydrant. And blend will change how sharp the fall off is for that shadow there. So if you turn the blend up, you're going to get more of a blurry ring instead of a harsh one. So let's crank that up a little more. So there we go. We got some nice little fall off going here with the shadows. And so that's It's kind of cool for the spotlight. Let's rotate this and kind of move it so we can kind of see what it looks like from a different angle. Just move that into place. There we go. Render that. Okay, so now you can see from an upper right-hand corner going down to the bottom and the left-hand side of this frame, kind of how this looks for this. So let's turn the energy up a little bit. A little more. Okay, we've got some nice brightness there. And again, let's talk about a little bit about blending and what you can do here. Now, you can put that on square instead of unchecking it, and it's going to try to cast a square shadow instead of a round one. So depending on the effect you're going for, you might find that useful at some point. Halo is an interesting effect. It'll turn on the cone of light, sort of like there's smoke in the air. So if you turn that on, I would crank this down to something pretty low to start off with. But you can see it adds that nice atmospheric sort of haze that's from filling the atmosphere with smoke. They do this a lot in theater when you're in play. Again, you don't need this bright. Even at 0.04, you've got a nice looking haze effect, and you really don't want to overdo that. It needs to be pretty subtle. So something low, that's good right there. And so changing this will control how much quality you've got there in terms of the step size for that. So that's pretty interesting. Now let's talk about changing this from buffer shadow to ray shadow. You're going to have the same settings that you had over here, and they're going to take these attributes and try to transfer what they can over to the ray shadow settings. So you're going to have the same fill shadow color here. You're going to have all the settings we're used to for ray shadows, and then of course you've got your same settings here. So let's just render this, see what happens. Now automatically you're going to be able to see a lot different shadow cast happening here than if you're using buffer shadows. So with buffer shadows, you don't even get a cast shadow there. With ray shadows turned on, there you go. Now this is a much more photorealistic look for the spot lamp. And again, if you change your soft size to something a little higher, turn your samples up to something like 12 and render this, you're going to get some very nice edge blurs going on here, especially with the cast light of this arm hitting the fire hydrant here. And just overall, you're going to get a much nicer fill effect with your shadows. And all the other settings pretty much stay the same. So let's switch this to square, just see what that looks like. And as you can see, a much higher quality square shadow example. And so pretty useful. And again, you can create a lot of interesting effects with the spot lamp. The spot lamp is also useful for things like headlamps on headlights on a car. And so if you want to create those, you could easily come in here and let's quickly just like rotate this, bring it down, go over here. Now, spot lamps in a car are going to have a little bit narrower field, but basically you can just put two of them side by side, and then just for the sake of our render, they wouldn't be turned in like this, they'd be parallel, but I'm just going to put those there, and then let's render that and see what that looks like. So you got two spot lamps that are next to each other here. You still got that nice halo effect going on. And let's change the soft size on these. So I'm going to delete this one, and instead I'm going to duplicate linked with Alt-D. So everything I change on one of these should change on the other. So let's change the soft size to like 0.6. Let's make sure that's working. Yeah, that's working. So anything I do to this one is going to be done to this one. Let's take some of this. We're going to lower this back down to get some more contrast. Take my samples, or my energy here, bring this down to like 1, because now we've got 2 lamps, and we don't need that much light in the scene anymore. Let's render this again. And so that's a little more realistic in terms of what you'd get from headlights on a car. But as you can imagine, a car sitting over here, you know, parked in a parking spot next to you know, a street corner, and then pointing down to this fire hydrant, that's a close approximation of what you might see if you took a photograph of that. So as you can see, you know, a lot of really simple tweaks here. Very quickly, we've set up a lighting environment for our scene using just, again, one type of lamp. And again, you're not restricted to just using one of these. You could use more than one together, and that's how we'll be lighting our final scene. So in the next lecture, I'm going to discuss the final lamp type in Blender called the area lamp over here. And it's going to be really handy when you want to light things in more of a studio type environment. So let's get into that next.